Hi, welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. This is Diane, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And today's episode is brought to you by Imani and breastpumps.com. Helping parents everywhere with the right tools, Imani recently released the Imani i1 Dual Breast Pump. And today's episode is also brought to you by Original Sprout. Scrumptious Baby Cream is the multi-purpose protective barrier baby cream. And we will hear more from our sponsors later. But you can head to badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com and check out our sponsor page. If you need anything, see if you can give any of them your business because they make this podcast possible. And while you're there, you can scroll down and enter your email address and we'll send episodes straight to your inbox every week. And now Diane has our review of the week.
I do. And I was just thinking that we don't use the word scrumptious enough. I don't think in regular everyday life. I think it's a cute word. Scrumptious.
Yeah. We're going to make a point to use that more.
Yeah. It's everybody's job today is to use that word scrumptious.
Mm-hmm. That word of the day. We should have a word of the day competition.
We should. Yes.
And then whoever hears the word of the day, we could post on social media and them and send them what do we have? Oh, the stickers.
Yeah. We have stickers. Yes. All right. Maybe we'll put that together. Stay tuned, everybody. Stay tuned. I do have our review of the week. It came from our Gmail account, badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com. Dear Abby and Diane, I have recently started listening to your fantastic podcast, having been breastfeeding my gorgeous 4-month-old baby girl. We have had the odd hiccup, blocked ducts, nipple pain, but generally have had a really enjoyable breastfeeding journey so far. We live in the UK where I work as a family doctor. I'm embarrassed to say my breastfeeding knowledge prior to having my baby was little to none. To my recollection, there was only one breastfeeding session for the whole of medical school. It was optional and covered mostly the composition of breast milk and benefits of breastfeeding with no real practical advice. I've been given and followed advice, which I have since learned to be myths, which your podcast has helped debunk. For example, pointing the baby's chin toward a blocked duct, which was no fun for me or my baby. I have read, listened, and learned so much from yourselves and other IBCLC resources since having my baby. I feel like when I do return to work, I'll be so much better equipped to support breastfeeding mothers. Please carry on doing what you're doing. You've helped me so much from all the way across the pond. And when I emailed her back, I was just like, oh my God, thank you so much for this, because we talk all the time about how medical providers really do not get a lot of breastfeeding knowledge in school during their training. And this is another, and I know we've had people email us about this in the past, but this is another one to prove that they really just do not get that same kind of attention to lactation as they do with other topics in school. So they kind of end up learning what they know as they go along. So I thought that this was a great example of that.
I love it when medical professionals like doctors come forward and say, it's true, we don't get, a lot of training in this, because I say it all the time, but people, don't necessarily have to believe me.
Right. Nobody listens to us. So
I know. I love it when I'm when they're say this is true.
Yeah.
And I know it's true because I've heard from so many doctors, but then when I repeat it, people are like, well, I don't know. How would you know?
Because who would believe, come on, why would anybody even think that you wouldn't get this information? Especially if you're an OB or a pediatrician or something like that, why would you think they wouldn't get that information? They're dealing with babies and mothers. Right. Why would you think they're not getting that info? But they don't. So this is great. And now she's going to arm herself with information to help her families. And honestly, the UK, they need that support there. Their breastfeeding rates aren't as good. And they, congratulations to her for going after and looking for information that she didn't get when she was in medical school. But I just thought it was really great to hear that from her, and told her congratulations on your baby. That's awesome. And 4 months, she's still on maternity leave. So that's a good thing too.
Nice.
I know.
Yeah. And that's where it's great that we pass on this information to individual breastfeeders. Because it obviously helps people, but being able to get it to professionals who can pass it on to a larger group of people. That's
so
amazing.
good. Yeah. It's so good. So thank you so much for sending that in. And, what was I going to say about that? Oh, you can also put your reviews on iTunes because that really helps. She did send it in via email for us. But if you listen, and can you do iTunes, then that is great too. It really helps us a lot. And so we've been off a couple weeks because Abby was out of town. So we're kind of like,
I was camping in the middle of the woods for 2 weeks, which I do every year. So if you've been a long-time listener, you know that in September there's a break, and then we come back not knowing what we're doing.
Yeah, and
although that might sound different, that might sound the same as all the other times. Right.
Except
and we both have colds. So,
we
both have colds, so we both probably sound kind of weird.
I know, and I'll probably be sniffling. Our producer is going to have to take all our sniffles out. But
I'm trying to be like so quiet over here.
I know. No, I'm not even going to bother. But I told Abby I probably have COVID. I just won't stick that thing up my nose. But I'm just like, sitting in my house, so nobody cares. Nobody cares if I'm sick. It's my dogs.
Yeah.
So we are back with a vengeance. So if you tuned in for we were pretty good about setting up some stuff before we left, but we did have a replay. So thank you so much if you tuned into that, because we always try to replay our favorites or our best ones. But today we are back with a vengeance, and we're going to talk about how to know your baby's getting enough milk, because that's always a thing, right?
Yeah, it's always a thing. I think it's rare when it's not a thing.
Oh, yeah.
When you're not worried about because somebody said something to you, or just because you don't know what you're doing.
Usually somebody says something to you.
Usually somebody says something to you. Yeah, but even if they don't, I think it's just kind of like, well, could this possibly even work? Like it's almost amazing. I mean, it is completely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But but the amazement has already started. We don't think about the amazing thing that happened while the baby was in you, right? Like it became a thing, became a living thing inside of you, and then grew to this healthy, stage and was born. That's incredible in and of itself. And then you're going to feed it with your own body. And then suddenly it's just like, wait a minute, how would that work?
Right.
But your body's already proven that it's amazing.
So I have to tell this story. Which just like popped into my head. Years ago, I was doing a impromptu kind of breastfeeding class at a baby store. It might have been like a Babies R Us or something. It was years ago. And this one sweet little pregnant mother was there, and she was saying that her husband, who was not there, is an engineer. And if you are an engineer, I don't mean this in any way, shape, or form to be negative, but we do know that engineers are very practical, right? Like just very practical. And her husband was an engineer, and she said to him, "Isn't this amazing? Like, look, my belly's getting bigger. We have this baby that's growing inside me. I'm making this baby." And he goes, "My fingernails grow too. Is that a miracle?" And it was just like, I know. And it was just like a very like we kind of laughed, because it's just like, oh, I never really thought about it like that. But, okay, whatever. But it was just like a very like practical thing. So,
yeah. It's true. Also, it is all. I think that's a good point, because it is amazing, all these things that are happening, but they're also very normal bodily functions. It's not like your body's doing something really extra. It's not like your body is like capable of doing something that other people's bodies can't. Like, obviously, like different bodies. You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
These are bodily functions that your body just knows how to do. And that extends to breastfeeding. Like, it's a very normal bodily function.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a educational video the other day, and they had this whole section on perceived insufficient milk supply. It's like a real thing. Like the majority, like it's a very high percentage. I should have written down the percentage. It was very high, like 80 or something like that, of people that have perceived insufficient milk supply, where they really do think that they're not making enough milk because of things that are going on around them, or because of what people are telling them, and don't realize that they're actually fine, that things are fine. Yeah. And we do know too that like now birth has become so medicalized that it's almost like being treated as an illness, not as
right. Not as a normal bodily function.
Yeah. Not, and we kind of look at that at, lactation too. People are like, oh, you can't a baby can't survive on just breast milk. What are you, crazy?
Right.
So So we are here today to tell you that there are ways to know that your baby is getting enough milk. And I absolutely remember when my first one was born feeling very, very uncomfortable with that. And my sister being like, oh, just, look at the diapers or do this. And I was like, that is not enough for me. I don't know what I needed. I needed like the bat signal or something like in the sky. I don't know. But I felt like that just wasn't enough. I just needed something more. And I talk to families about this every single day because it's the biggest concern. It is the biggest thing that comes out. Is how do I know?
Yeah, I feel like also evolution hasn't helped because we as early humans were, we're all animals, obviously, but we're much more reliant on instinct and, because your cat isn't like, oh no, I don't know if I'm making enough milk. Like they just do what their instincts tell them to do. And like early humans, did as well. But now we've grown and evolved to these like conscious, logical beings. And we really do kind of like this engineer, we are not as connected to, our instincts and our natural, processes. We want this measurable scientific proof that breastfeeding doesn't provide for you.
It doesn't.
You don't have, like the measuring marks on your boobs.
Yeah. And that's really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially like when it's a situation where maybe you're discharged from the hospital and they're very concerned about weight loss for your baby or, something like that where they're already measuring and they're already voicing concerns. And when I say they, I mean your pediatricians or whatever, are already voicing concern about what your baby is doing and how much your baby is getting. Then I feel like you can just never really get away from that.
Yeah. And so I imagine that many families come to you for this problem.
Yes.
I don't think my baby is getting enough.
Yes, absolutely.
So what do you do?
So one of the first things that I always tell people, and which is everywhere, is to watch the diapers. And when I do prenatal classes, we talk about this, like how many diapers to look for and how many you should be seeing if your baby is getting enough milk. So like in the beginning, when your baby is first born in the hospital, you should see like one wet diaper and one poop for every day of their life. So for example, if they're 3 days old, you should see 3 of each.
Oh.
But until about day 5,
and then after...
I know, not like day 18, right? Like 30 diapers, I know. So by the time they're about day 5, their poop should be transitioned. So if you are pregnant that right now and you're listening, your baby's poop is going to go from that very dark, tarry meconium the first day or 2, and then it's going to kind of turn brownish, greenish, and then it's going to turn yellow. And normal breastfed baby poop is soft, almost like like people sometimes think it's diarrhea. It's like soft, yellow, and can be like a little seedy, like it looks a little curdy. Yep. That is normal breastfed baby poop. And that's what it should look like by about day 5. If your baby by day 5 still has very dark poop, I would be a little bit concerned about like what's going on here. Like, is the baby not transferring milk well? Is the baby not feeding well? Because the poop should be transitioned by this time. So poop tells us a lot. Like the poop really does tell us a lot of stuff.
This is exactly what happened to me with Exley.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he, his poop went from the dark, tarry meconium poop to the green poop. And then after about a week of that, it hadn't changed. And so I contacted a lactation consultant and I was like, his poop is still green. Is that supposed to be happening? And she said, no, it's not.
Yeah.
So we went to have him weighed and he hadn't gained any weight. And so she was like, okay, he's not gaining weight. That's a problem. He hasn't lost weight, so that's good. She was like, thankfully he hasn't lost any weight. But then it was, this is why we need lactation consultants and why you need to call one. Because she told me it was like the simplest things. She was like, let's let's focus on, because I had already had a baby. So she was like, do you know how to work on the latch? And I was like, yeah, I've done that before. She's like, all right, let's work on the latch. Let's get a deeper latch. Let's fish his lips out. Let's, do these things. And then try some breast compressions while he's eating, just like while he's eating, kind of massage and compress the breast. And, I was also tandem nursing. And I was like, I thought tandem nursing was just going to be this big boob party. Like, everyone just grab a boob. There's enough to go around. And she was like, yeah, no, make sure the baby gets the full one. Like, pay attention. Make sure the baby gets the one that has all the milk in it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess we need to do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
so those 3 things. And then I swear to God, within a week, we went back to get weighed. He had gained like double the amount that, was expected.
But if he had been your first, would you have even thought?
Oh, my God. No, I wouldn't even have known. No, I probably wouldn't have known that the poop was supposed to change. And I probably would have been relying on the pediatrician.
Right.
Because I didn't know then to call a lactation consultant. This time I didn't even think to call my doctor. I was like, I need to call a lactation consultant.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. I wouldn't have known.
And then by the time your baby is like 5 or 6 days old, like your milk supply should be in, your baby should be feeding on your milk supply. And you're probably going to see like 6 or so really wet diapers a day and probably 2 to 3 good poops. Like that is it. And you might see more. You might have a baby that poops at every feeding. That is fine. But this is like the minimum of what we want to see that tells us your baby's getting enough is about 6 to 8 wet diapers a day in 24 hours and about 2 to 3 good poops. That is enough to tell us your baby is getting enough to eat. Now, in the world of lactation and breastfeeding, we know that you will receive a lot of inconsistent information. Like it is just
totally
rampant, right? Rampant. But the one thing that stays very, very consistent across the board with doctors and pediatricians and everything is watching for diapers. Like that is really what they're going to tell you. You go to your pediatrician for their first appointment, they're going to say, how many wet diapers is your baby having? If you call and say, I don't know if my baby's getting enough, they're going to say, well, how many wet diapers is your baby having? Like that is the one thing that you will find to be very consistent throughout breastfeeding. So we know that this is legit. Like this is the thing that we watch for, because if it's going in, it's coming out. That is the biggest thing we look for is how many wet and dirty diapers and what that poop looks like, which is why they have you track it for the first few days.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, yeah. So we should probably take a break and then we'll talk about some other things we can watch for.
Okay.
It's not just a big poop party. It's more
right. There's more you could do.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
I'm going to go sniffle somewhere.
I'm going to try to get through this without sniffling everywhere. Today's episode is brought to you by Imani and breastpumps.com. Helping parents everywhere with the right tools. Imani recently released the Imani i1 dual breast pump, featuring the quietest motor on the market. Experience optimal pumping with hospital strength output, as well as a never before seen boost mode. Whether pumping from one breast or both, this smart system maintains a constant pumping pressure. Its 2 main cycles, massage and express, include multiple vacuums on each cycle. Portable, efficient, and hands-free. Find out why Imani USA products are trusted by over 46 million parents around the world throughout their breastfeeding journey. For more information, you can visit ImaniUSA.com. That's IMANIUSA.com. And you can use code BADASS for 25% off of your purchase. But you can also visit breastpumps.com/Imani to place an order using your insurance benefits. And today's episode is also brought to you by Original Sprout. Original Sprout carries those safe, effective, and pediatrician-tested shampoos, conditioners, styling, and body care products that we are always raving about. Scrumptious Baby Cream is a multi-purpose protective barrier baby cream to keep skin smooth and soft. Natural zinc provides an environmental defense, gentle yet ultra moisturizing for happy skin and a happy baby. You won't need to worry about harsh chemicals irritating your baby's skin. All of Original Sprouts products are paraben and phthalate-free, vegan, and cruelty-free. Their proprietary formulas contain nourishing extracts from fruits, vegetables, and flowers that the whole family can enjoy. made for babies, perfect for grown-ups too. I actually use this scrumptious baby cream all the time. Check out the entire line at originalsprout.com. That's originalsprout.com and use code BADASS for 25% off your purchase. And the sponsors and their promo codes can be found in our show notes under this episode at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. Our show notes will also include further information about things we talk about in this episode, and at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. You will also find our breastfeeding resources, all of our other episodes, and information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Diane.
Yes.
Who will help you figure out if your baby is getting enough.
I will, for sure. And just a little side note, I use the, I have their No Worries, the Original Sprout No Worries leave-in conditioner. It smells like grapefruit. I love it. Oh my God, it smells so good. It really does smell. I'm like, what is this smell? And it finally realized it was grapefruit. Love it. Mm-hmm. So I did a little, we all know that I love my little Google searches about this stuff, usually just to debunk whatever comes up because it's usually just something stupid. But of course, it all came up about watching the diapers. That is the biggest thing to watch for. And there are a lot of things that happen with feeding because breastfeeding is so variable from person to person and baby to baby. So there are some things that just don't work when you're talking about how to know if your baby's getting enough. And that could be some people, for example, a lot of times people will say, do your breasts feel empty after you're done feeding? If you're a first-time mom and you're really not sure what that feels like, that might not be a good gauge for you. If you have an oversupply of milk and you're not really sure what that feels, that might not be a good gauge for you. I hear that all the time.
That doesn't seem ideal.
So that might not be something. I mean, I hear all this. I even ask people, do you does the breast feel emptier? Do you feel fuller before the baby feeds? Do you feel empty? Sometimes people are like, I really don't know what to compare that to. I've never felt that before. So that's legit, if you're really not sure. People that have an oversupply, they'll be like, but I don't feel empty afterwards. I'm like, that baby's not taking all that milk out. You're going to feel full because you have too much milk. It just,
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people also don't realize they have an oversupply, but that's a whole different podcast, which we do have, by the way. So it really is about watching the diapers and knowing your baby and knowing, okay, they look pretty content after they eat, right? Not every time. That's another, I've had families that were like, I thought the baby was just supposed to go to sleep after every single feeding. No, not necessarily. In the beginning, when you have a newborn, absolutely, because your newborn is not giving you that much awake time. But as your baby gets a little bit older, you're not going to have a comatose baby after every single feed. That milk drunk look is not going to be after every single feed when you have a baby that's a couple of months old. Yeah. You might see that at night or, before nap time when they're tired anyway, but not every single feed. They'll just kind of pop off and go play or whatever.
Yeah, they're going to start to becoming more alert and around, aware of their surroundings and wanting to interact.
Yeah. So we also have to look at what stage your baby is in too. And we also have to know okay, this newborn phase, when your baby's first born, those first few weeks, they're really sleepy. They're going to fall asleep at the breast. That doesn't necessarily mean they're done eating. That means they fell asleep at the breast. They're always going to look kind of, sleepy. So sometimes that is hard to gauge. Did they get what they need or not? One of the other things that I read when I was looking it up was, oh, your baby comes off when they're done. Not as a newborn, they don't. And I tell people that all the time. Newborn babies will stay on all day because that's where they love to be. Yeah. So that isn't, if you're waiting for your baby to come off as a sign that they're finished and they're 3 days old, probably not going to happen.
No, and you can tune in for our next episode, which is the 4th trimester, for all about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's coming up next, folks. So that is, so if your newborn baby's probably not going to just pop off and be like, hi, I'm done. But your older baby will. Your older baby will absolutely do that.
And your older baby is going to be, and then you're going to be like, oh my God, they only nurse for 5 minutes. How could they possibly have gotten enough when they're older? Because then they become more efficient feeders, and then they are more engaged in the world, and they just are older. So it's so different, and it changes so quickly.
It changes very quickly. And that's a really great, I'm so glad you said that, because that was another thing I wanted to mention, was that a lot of times you will have medical professionals tell you your baby should be feeding for 15 minutes on each breast. And if they're not doing that, then they're not feeding for long enough, and they're not getting enough milk. That is bullshit, ladies and gentlemen. That is not an accurate statement. Babies all feed differently. They all do different things at different times. And we can't put a time limit on these things. We just can't, because that's not a good gauge of how your baby's feeding. You can have a baby, you can absolutely force your baby to stay on the breast for 15 minutes. It doesn't mean they're eating. It just meant that they were there for 15 minutes.
How do you force a baby to be on the breast?
I don't even know.
I don't understand that. You can't force your baby to breastfeed. You could jam a bottle in their mouth, I guess, but like, you can't force them to latch.
No.
They just won't.
Can't. No. And then a week later, people are like, why aren't they latching? So it's like, you can't really win because or get them off me because now they're on there too much, you can't, it's just really, you really just can't win with that. But it's not about how long they are on. It's about what they're doing when they're there. The other important thing, which I think everybody needs a lactation consultant for, is recognizing that your baby's actually feeding, seeing the swallows, hearing I mean, some babies you can hear them swallow, some of them you really can't. But being able to identify that is a swallow, that is your baby feeding. Mm-hmm. That is really, really important, because some babies will just sit there and suck. And people go, oh, but they're still sucking, so they must be eating. They're not eating. So it's really helpful, and I think very empowering and confidence building when you can recognize my baby is sucking and swallowing. I know they're eating. And I think that is really, really important. But if you don't have somebody saying to you, this is what you're watching for, and pointing to you, that is a swallow right there. I do that with parents all the time. That's a swallow. That's a swallow. That's a swallow. Because they really need to be able to identify that to know that their baby's eating. These random sucks, they'll do that for all day. And it doesn't, I had somebody the other day that was like, my baby's been feeding for 3 hours. Like, no, they're not. They're not feeding for 3 hours. I'm pretty sure they're not.
They do all kinds of things when they're latched on, right?
Yeah.
They sleep.
Yeah.
They
sleep.
They sleep, and they don't suckle. Sometimes they're just sitting there. Sometimes they suckle a little because that's their comfort. And then they're eating. There's all different kinds of, sucks. If you look and watch and learn the different ones, you can see what they're doing.
Right. But when it's your first baby and this is your first rodeo here, like, you're not supposed to know. How are you supposed to know?
No, there's no way to know.
But this is why lactation consultants are really important, or at least a very, well-educated nurse in lactation that can sit with you and say, this is what, your baby is doing. And that is really important. It's really important to be able to identify that. I always make sure partners are watching too. And I'll be like, this is what you're looking for right here. And I always even say, do you know how to watch for swallows? Do you know how to watch for sucks and swallows? Sometimes, once you really get good at it, which doesn't take very long, because then once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you start to really recognize that those comfort sucks are different than the feed sucks. It's like you don't recognize that at first, but then you start recognizing that after, oh, this feels different than when the baby's actually eating and swallowing. This suck feels different. And it's like, yes, that is your baby doing their non-nutritive suckling, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is different because they're not taking milk at that time. So it does feel different. So it is really important. When you can have all that knowledge, it is really empowering, because then you really feel like, oh, I can see what my baby's doing and I can recognize it and identify it. And that is really important. It's really empowering, because then you
and you can we can put it, or you can Google little videos.
Yeah,
that will show you this.
Yeah.
Okay. That, where you can see the difference.
Yeah, because it is really good. And that is super important. And then knowing that your baby is then seeing that very relaxed demeanor afterwards, those noodly arms and, just very, very relaxed, very content. They're content for an hour or so after eating. and that's another thing that I think is really hard for people to wrap around their heads, is that sometimes babies are fine doing an every 2-hour feed and sometimes they're not. So that is normal. That is what feeding on demand looks like. You might have those babies that are going longer stretches at times, and then sometimes they want to eat every 2 hours. That is really normal. And I always tell people that, like, I had a family the other day, actually, that newborn baby, like the first week of life, and was eating like every 3 hours around the clock. That was pretty much her thing, was like every 3 hours. And I said, don't be surprised if that changes when she starts to become a little bit more alert and awake. You might see every 2 hours. You might see, sooner than that. And that's normal. People always think like, is a baby not getting enough to eat? Is that why they're, feeding more frequently? But that is just a normal process. And they're like, okay, because I think that's important for people to know that might change. I mean, babies are different. Yeah. Like my twins, I have boy-girl twins. My daughter was an every 3-hour feeder. My son absolutely was not. He had to be fed more frequently than that. Like, it's just different. They're just different all the time. And those are two babies that we're feeding at the same time. Like they're born together and they're very different feeding patterns. So it just depends on what your baby's doing. And they can change. They're allowed to change it up.
And they will.
And they will.
They will.
Yes, they will. And it doesn't mean they're not getting enough to eat. It just means they're changing it up. That's all. Something else that I think is really important for people to realize too is that your baby, like, I really feel like there's a lot of, I don't want to say rules. I don't know if that's the right word, around how much milk your baby should take per feeding. And like if your baby is, somebody said to me the other day that they were told their baby should be taking like 3 to 4 ounces of milk, 8 times a day. And I'm like, but what if they take 2 ounces of milk and just feed more than 8 times a day? Like, can't we do it that way too? Like that works, right? Like it all adds up to being the same amount in the end. So it's not about like, okay, your baby has to take this much milk at every feeding, because they're going to take different amounts at every feeding. It's about like what's comfortable for them at the time, right? And what they're doing. They might not want a full feeding all the time. And that's okay too. But if you're following their lead, you can't go wrong. You can't if you're doing what they want you to do.
So what about weighed feedings? I feel like that can be very telling.
Yes.
Although can also be very not telling.
Well, yeah. And somebody told me that once, like I'd asked them, like, did they do a weighed feed at your, doctor's office or whatever? And the mom said, they told me they wouldn't do that because if the baby didn't take enough milk, then that would like disappoint me or something like that. And I'm like, but that tells you that even if but you need to know that, you know what I mean? Like you need to know if the baby's not taking enough milk so that you can.
Yeah, right. You do need to know that. But then you have that problem of, so the weighed feed is when you go to the lactation consultant's office or the doctor's office and you haven't fed your baby yet and you feed your baby, they weigh them. Then you feed your baby and then they weigh them again. And then you could see how much they drank, which will tell you that they're getting milk.
Right.
But what if they happen to have just like a short feed?
So what I usually do with that is, okay, there's a couple things. So when you do a weight feed, and the weight feeds aren't like, they're not an exact science. So, but it does tell us, it does give us an idea of what's going on. So we know, like, as long as you're going in being like, okay, this isn't an exact science, but it does tell us a little bit about what's happening. So as a lactation consultant, and we're all pretty versed in being able to identify if a baby's not feeding well. So if the mom, and we all know too, that like setting appointment times around babies feeding is not always perfect either. So I could tell you, okay, come in and see me at 3:00. And moms are always like, all right, I'll try to like plan it, but you can't always do that.
Yeah.
So if they come in and say, okay, but the baby fed an hour ago. Okay, by the time we talk, we get the baby undressed, we get the baby changed, we get the baby weighed, they're probably going to be fired up enough that they'll want to go on at least for, a few minutes. But even if they're only feeding a couple of minutes, that still tells me what's going on. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if I see a baby that's feeding like for, 10 minutes, and they're sucking, swallowing, and they transfer an ounce or two of milk, I'm going to be like, oh, they did really great. And they just fed an hour and a half ago. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worried about this baby eating. But if it's been like an hour and a half, they go on, or maybe like 2 hours, they go on, they're not like doing much of anything. They're not sucking and swallowing, maybe transfer like not even a couple of grams or whatever, a couple kilograms. And mom says, well, the last feed wasn't really that great either. Then that's going to tell, okay, they're probably not feeding well. Or they look like they're really trying to feed and not much is happening. So we know what to look for. And I always make sure to tell parents, like, this is what you want, this is what I'm looking for. But it is important to know, like, okay, what did they do at the last feeding? When was that last feeding and how did they do at that feeding? Because if they don't do great at this feeding, but they did really well at the last feeding and the last feeding was only an hour and a half ago, okay, I'm not going to be too worried then. I'm not going to be too worried your baby only took half an ounce because they did look like they were pretty efficient while they did it and they just fed really well an hour ago. So that's fine. But you do need to be able to like really know what you're looking for. And you can really, most lactation consultants, I think, if they're watching a baby feed, can know what they're looking for and can tell like, okay, this is not a baby that's feeding efficiently. This is not a baby who looks like they're trying to, that looks like they're really doing well at the breast.
And so if you come to that conclusion, what's next? So if somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh, yeah, I think that there's some concern here.
Then I'm going to, I do a lot of, I ask a ton of questions, but I always want to know, like, how does the baby suck feel? Has there been any problems with breastfeeding anywhere along the way? Especially if it's a baby that's like 2 months old. I'm always like, okay, what happened in the first 2 months? Like, why are we now just seeing the baby? Is this a new problem? Like, what, what is going on? Has there ever been any issues? How was birth? What happened at birth? And we know from, our interventions episodes that things that happen at birth can absolutely impact how babies feed. So that is something that I always want to make sure we talk about too. And like, what has been happening all along? Has there been supplementing? Has there been a weight problem? And usually, like, if people contact me about a weight problem, I'm like, all right, sometimes what pediatricians say is a weight problem isn't necessarily a weight problem because they're looking at formula feeding babies all the time. Yeah. And those babies gain more. So sometimes it's like, okay, are we looking for a huge weight gain and not seeing it because that's not realistic? Or is it really not a good weight gain? You can also tell by looking at a baby. And I was telling Abby before we started that I saw a baby on video yesterday who it was a weight gain issue. They were very concerned about weight and, they were told they were, by their midwife that they were concerned about weight, but this baby was she looked perfect. She had these big full cheeks and a belly and was very active and very interactive and, distracted and just doing all the right things. And, I was just like, oh my gosh, this baby looks perfect. When babies aren't gaining well, you can really see it in them. They look small, they look thin, they might be sleepier. They might not, they might be feeding very frequently, like every half hour to every hour, like around the clock, not just, and it is very telling. Like you definitely can see that when the baby is not getting enough to eat.
So what do we do to get babies to eat enough?
The breast compressions is great. So how your lactation consultant told you, like, okay, here, do these breast compressions. That is great. And that's also my favorite way of keeping a baby awake because we know in the beginning when they're super sleepy that they are not, sometimes they're just not like, they're just dozing, right? Like a couple sucks and swallows and then they just fall asleep. So those breast compressions are really helpful because it just like pushes milk down into their mouth. So they're forced to like keep swallowing. Yeah. So that is really good to do. And it's just a tool that we use. And you'll find that as your baby gets a little bigger, you won't need to do that as much. But people are like, is the baby going to get used to me doing this? I feel like I'm just milking myself. What is it? It's like, no, this is just helping them. You're just helping them, really. Like they just need a little help in the beginning. So that's all you're doing is helping them along. Breast compressions are really great. And identifying the problem, like it's not helpful to be like, okay, your baby's not gaining weight. They're not getting enough milk. Here, just supplement them. But why aren't they getting enough? Like we need to figure out why. It's not just, because if you just like supplement them and go, okay, now they've gained weight with the supplementing, so now you don't have to supplement them anymore. Like, are they going to continue to gain well?
And what are some reasons that they don't gain? It's like latch.
It could be like if the latch isn't good. It could be if there's like a tongue tie or, a restriction. It could be like a disorganized suck issue. I've seen that quite a bit where the babies just are not sucking. Their coordination is just not where it needs to be. They're disorganized. They're not transferring milk well. It could be muscle issue. Maybe if they have a very weak suck, and stuff like that tends to come back to a lot of times how they're born. And how what is going on with that baby. So you do have to have all those pieces of the puzzle of like, how was the baby born? Was there any issues? Was it a long labor? Was it a C-section delivery? Was it vacuum extraction? Was it, like all of those things everything plays a role. Everything goes together. A lot of like those kinds of things sometimes, is it an early baby? Babies that are, that's, another thing, babies that are like 36, 37 weeks, they don't necessarily feed that well. So sometimes that's all it is. And once they get to be like 40 weeks, like their actual gestational age, then we see that they kind of turn it up and they start to feed a little bit better. Sometimes if babies aren't feeding well from the start, they're really sleepy, jaundice, things like that. Once they do get a little bit extra milk in them, then they take off and they're fine. But it's just being able, you need help identifying what is going on and why. It's not enough to just be like, all right, the baby didn't gain, so let's supplement them. We need to find why didn't they? Is there a reason why? Is there something we need to be looking for here? Or is it just that your baby's a little bit early, they're a little bit sleepy, and they just need a little bit of help and then they'll be fine. It's not always a milk supply issue. And I think that's a really important thing to remember is if there is a weight problem, if you think your baby's not getting enough milk, don't automatically think it's a milk supply issue because it's probably not. Most of the time it's not.
Yeah. And and if you contact a lactation consultant, they can help you. Like if you just start supplementing, I mean, if, then like you can't get help with the actual issue.
Right. We need to find out what the problem is. And I mean, my thought process on it, and I could be totally wrong, but I kind of feel like babies are meant to breastfeed. Like instinctively, that's what they're supposed to do, right? We know that like when they're born, instinctively breastfeeding is what their body is made up to do. If they're not doing it, why aren't they? Because instinctively they should be. So if they're not doing it the right way, or they're not doing it well, or not doing it successfully, then we need to find like what's going on, because there's something happening there and we just need to figure out what it is. That's all. But most of the time you do need to have a lactation consultant to help you with that, because it's, I mean, that mom's group on Facebook is not going to be able to solve your problem. It's just,
right. Yeah. Right. And if you do, so we can't like diagnose everybody individually right here. But we can tell you these are the things to look for and to contact a lactation consultant to help you identify the problem. And then once you identify the problem, you can fix it.
Yeah, then we make a plan to fix it and then we move forward. But it is, obviously the earlier the better. I mean, if you really feel, if you're seeing those little signs of, okay, the poop is still dark, or I'm not getting enough diapers, or, my baby seems to not be satisfied because they're still like, they're not relaxed after feeding. They're not, whatever. Then we'll, that's something that we should be looking at from the start, like sooner rather than later. It's easier to turn around when it's early.
Yes.
Not that you can't turn it around later, but it's easier to turn around early.
Yeah. When in doubt, get help.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah. So that's like it.
So thanks so much, Diane.
Well, it's good to be back, everybody.
Yeah, it is. We can go blow our noses.
Sound congested. Yeah. It is good for us to be back. And we didn't have any major tech problems. So that's a miracle in and of itself.
It's a miracle. Yeah. That's much more of a miracle than birth.
Like Abby mentioned, we are going to be talking about the 4th trimester pretty soon. So that'll be very interesting.
Yep, we will. See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.